everybody. So back to this title screen. Doing a presentation on backyard chickens, kind of where to start, what to expect. So who am I? My name is Hanna Fish. I'm a livestock health technician. I've been with the egg branch since about this time last year. I also work within the livestock extension services unit with the technicians. And yeah, I have a background in agriculture. I grew up on a ranch in Saskatchewan, experienced raising meat birds. So it's been really exciting to get to know a lot of the Yukoners and the different ways that we all produce livestock up here. So let's kind of get started. So where should you buy birds if you're just getting started? So you're going to want to buy from a reputable biosecure breeder. And you're going to want to keep a record of who you buy from and when. So when you're keeping records, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can contact the person you bought the birds from if anything goes wrong, because they're going to want to know if their flock had any problems as well. So you can get different birds from different areas in town. You can buy from local producers, or I do know that feed store and C&D Feeds brings in chicks every year. So when you get these new chicks, the chances are that they're going to be pretty dehydrated after the transportation. You want to transport them in warmer weather, and that's also going to lead to this dehydration. So you're going to want to supply fresh water almost immediately when they get to your property. When you get new birds, depending if you have any ones already, you need to quarantine them. And that's to make sure that you don't get any of your new flocks or your remaining flock sick. So you're going to want to do this for about a week to 30 days in a dedicated separate location from any other livestock on your property. I know I have farm listed here, but even in your backyard, you're going to want to keep them separate from your other layers because you never know what might be brought in and what they could have picked up over transport. So you just really want to make sure that they are nice and healthy. So what type of birds should you get? So you want to ensure you do a lot of research with your breeds. Some breeds have different temperaments. Some are pretty docile, some are more aggressive. So you want to make sure that they're the type that you're going to want to be able to handle. The next thing you're going to look for is that there's some hardy bird breeds. So you want something that can withstand some pretty cold temperatures, which we see here in the Yukon. Birds with small combs are less susceptible to the frostbite, so you're going to want to take note of that. And it's also a good idea to contact local poultry producers to discuss the popular breeds that are already in your area, and you might get some advice as to which ones to avoid and which ones are really good. A few different of the breeds that we could mention are Western Rustic or Cornish Giant for your meat birds, Miller Brown or Leghorn for your layers. And then there's some good dual purpose breeds. So that's meat and egg production. So you got your Rhode Island Reds or your Plymouth Rock. So how many can you get? Well, if you're within the city limits of Whitehorse, you're only allowed 6 hens, so no roosters are allowed, and you have to require a hen permit. So in the handout I'm going to be sending out, I'll have the links to the hen permits for the city of Whitehorse. If you're in any other zone, I recommend looking up your zoning regulations, as it'll kind of tell you the different aspects of raising livestock in your area and what all that entails. But if you're within the city limits, you're limited to 6 hens, which if this is your first time owning birds, 6 is a great number to start with. So how much space do you need? Within the Whitehorse city limit, you can only have a coop that's 10 square meters in floor area. So you want to make sure that your coop is well designed. You're also going to need a run. So keep that into account when you're deciding where you want your coop and how many birds you want to keep, because this is your maximum amount when you're in the city of Whitehorse. If you're in different zones, you can build them to different sizes. Your coop should be really well designed to prevent any birds from getting out and any animals from getting in. So it's highly recommended to have netting or string line across the top of the outdoor run, so no flying predators can get in. Electric fence is always good to have to keep wildlife at bay. There's a great link on Wildwise, and that is also going to be listed in my handout. What else do you need for your housing? Like I mentioned, outdoor run. Chickens thrive on being able to access the outdoors, and it's really good for their health. It's good for air ventilation and a lot of different other aspects. You're going to need some litter for inside your coop. Different litter types can be straw, sawdust, mulch, paper, grass clippings, whatever you find is going to be able to stay dry in your coop and provide your chickens with enough bedding that they're going to be happy and healthy. You're also going to need some lights and power. So when it comes to the lights, you're going to want to give them about 6 hours consecutively of darkness. So in the summertime, when you lock them up at night, make sure that the no light's really getting in. But you're also going to want to give them 16 hours of sunlight. So I know that these numbers don't exactly match up to our 24-hour scale, and that's because those are the numbers for consecutive hours. So maximum 16 hours of consecutive light and minimum 6 hours of darkness. So you can play with that to your needs. You can get timers for setting your light bulbs on and off. You're going to want power because you're going to want to keep your coop nice and warm. Animals thrive on having a warm, dry area to live. Thermometers are a great use for that. So put a thermometer in your coop. You can manage your temperature and see where it fluctuates. Notice if there's any drafts. Birds really don't like having drafts, but they need good air ventilation because you want to keep the ammonia levels down. So all super important aspects. So they need food and water. They're animals, of course. So they're going to want a balanced chicken feed. So depending on what type of bird you get, you can either get a laying or a meat ration. And you're going to want to give them some nutritional enrichments. So fruits and vegetables are great options for this. So essentially the greens. But you need to keep in mind that this is a treat and not their main source of nutrients. And as backyard gardeners, which I think most of our group here is, there's different types of greens that you can give them. So they really like the dark leafy greens. They also like beets, broccolis, carrots, different types of fruits. So watermelon's a really good option. Strawberries, blueberries, some raspberries in there. But again, you need to really take into account how much you're giving to your birds at a time because it's a snack. It's essentially their dessert, and they shouldn't be living off of the dessert. They need their good balanced ration. And you're going to see that in the meat or egg produced by your birds. So definitely if you're giving them a high quality diet, they're going to be growing well and producing nice eggs. And you're also going to need to give them fresh water. So it's really important factor that your birds are able to access water. You don't want your feeders or your waters to empty too often, solely for the fact of you don't want competition between your birds. Lack of resources can lead to some aggression in birds. So what you want to do is make sure that you're supplying enough that your birds are all going to be happy and not competing for their resources. In my handout, I will also list a few different other types of fruits and vegetables that are really good for birds. A few things I do want to note that aren't good is rhubarb's not great for birds, neither is avocados. Coffee grounds, citrus peels, they're really harsh on their stomachs. Moldy food isn't great for birds, along with salty food. So it can really throw off their pHs and can lead to kind of a mess in your coop when it comes to when they're defecating. So you want to keep that in mind when you're feeding your birds, that you're not giving them something that's going to be either toxic and fatal or something that's really going to upset their digestive system. Manure, the fun fact about feeding birds is stuff comes out. So this is the one part that you really got to keep in mind for when you're designing your coop is you want it to be able to be easily cleaned. So when you're setting up your roosts, which I didn't quite touch on, I do have lots in the handout. Roosts are essentially, they look like this, like that, like a bar that your birds can sit on. Having that removable or liftable so you can get out and underneath of it so that you can remove all of the bedding or the droppings easily when it comes time to clean your coop. So when can you put manure in your gardens? That's their main question of the day. So there's a few different things. You're going to need to compost it first because you're not going to want to apply it straight to your gardens if you're producing that year because it could burn your crops, which we don't want. So the ideal time to apply it is either after harvest, so late into the fall, apply it across your garden, or early in the spring before you actually plant. You can also, if you rotate your gardens, apply it to the off-season garden every time you clean, and then next year it'll be nice and fertilized. But you definitely need to have it broken down a little bit before straight applying it to some of these plants because it does have a high risk of burning. So it's really not really high, but it's generally pretty high in nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and calcium, which, I mean, nitrogen is a pretty good thing to add to your soil, especially up here in the Yukon. How do we harvest these birds? So depends on what you have. If you have a meat bird, it's unfortunately unlawful to slaughter them in the city limits, but there is an inspected abattoir in the Yukon, so there's the farm gate. And yeah, and then the other way is if you have layers, collecting your eggs, aim for twice a day, so morning and night when you go to feed them. If you leave eggs out too long, they can sometimes pick at them, and then you're going to end up with poor quality eggs. So definitely make sure you're harvesting your eggs about twice a day, and then harvesting your birds later into the fall when they're bigger size if you choose to do the meat bird route. Pest preventions for your coops. So you want to avoid standing water, contaminated feed or litter, keeping things in good repair to keep the wildlife away, as well as pests and bugs. However, birds do like invertebrates, so that isn't a super big concern if invertebrates are around, but you don't want them affecting the quality of your coop, litter, or your feed. So keep that all in mind. Moving old lumber and equipment away from your coop. So if you're setting it up in your backyard, in town, keeping a neat and tidy backyard is really going to be useful because I mean, they're already going to be an attractant for different things, and you don't want any more coming by just for the fun of it. So definitely keeping pests away is a good option. And again, visiting Wildwise to learn more about the predators. Sanitation. So you're going to need to sanitize your coop. That's part of having healthy livestock. So it helps prevent illnesses by sanitizing your huts, shelters, waters, feeders, basically any portion of your entire coop, outdoor run, and anything you use to go in this run. So you're going to want to have boots that you sanitize and that you don't wear around the city into other people's farms, because that's a great way to bring bacteria back and forth or viruses. So buckets, boots, pitchforks, anything that really is going to be entering the coop and interacting within your birds. This leads to our biosecurity portion. So there's two different kinds. There's external and there's internal. So external is, again, you don't want to be taking things to other people's farms or getting that onto yours. So that's just a method of making sure you're sanitizing things, changing your clothes, not interacting with other poultry owners right after you've dealt with your own flock or vice versa. And internal biosecurity. So if you have more than just one coop, so if you're in a rural residential, country residential, something like that, and you have two different coops, not transferring between the two, that's also a really good option. We had a lovely talk by Dr. Gigi Lin earlier this spring, and it's all about poultry biosecurity presentations. So that'll be included in the handout. You can view that on the YouTube as well. So illness and injury, the unfortunate side of having livestock. Animals get hurt. It's part of life. It's what happens. So you need to be able to seek out veterinary advice. And if you feel unqualified or capable of end-of-life strategies, have a disposal plan, have somebody available that they can help you out. So there's different disposal plans for dead stock, and one of them is the landfill, or if you get a necropsy done, leaving the animal with the veterinarians for them to dispose. Yeah, so the unfortunate side, but there is different things. Having an extra cage or kennel nearby that you can place the sick or injured bird into so that he's not being picked on by the other birds. They're kind of cliquey, if that makes sense. They don't like things that look odd. So if you have birds that have a sore or kind of a wound, they're going to bug him a little bit because he looks different. So they don't understand that. Cost of things. So the other fun question, I just made a rough estimate after looking at different shops in town here and rough estimates on feeding needs. But in your first year, if you get 6 hens and have nothing to start with, it's going to cost about $1,400. The coop is probably going to be the most expensive part, but then feed is up there. And it's just a good thing to keep in mind that it is a big investment to start with, but the benefits come and they come slowly depending on how many birds you have. So you can sell your eggs, you can sell the meat birds, and that can help offset it, but it is a bit of a expense off the get-go. A few things to keep in mind. I mentioned this earlier. Poultry are major attractants for wildlife, so particularly bears, which we have lots of here. So definitely checking out Wildwise and getting some resources to keep the wildlife off your property is a good option. Poultry require daily care, so you're going to want to be checking in on these birds at least once a day to make sure they're happy, healthy, no issues are arising. So if you're unable to do that, having somebody that can help you out with it, if you go on vacation, having someone to take care of them, they aren't super self-sufficient, so they definitely need a bit of a babysitter sometimes. So at least once a day, checking in on them. And agriculture is a great thing, and it's a good thing that we're able to do it up here in the Yukon. And keep your neighbors in mind. So if you're living within the Whitehorse city limits, or even out in the different areas, and you have close by neighbors, your poultry might affect them. So there's going to be noise associated with it. It's not high noise, but they do make some sounds. And there's going to be some smell, depending on how you do your manure and composting piles. So keeping your neighbors in mind, a good neighbor is a great neighbor, and agriculture is a good thing, and we want to keep that positive. So definitely taking those things into account when you're setting up your practice. Useful services within Whitehorse, one of them being the veterinary services program. So if you have 6 or more birds, you are eligible for $1,000 for private veterinary services. If you have 6 or less, then $50 for private veterinary services. And there's no limitation on the telemedicine or necropsies or other activities like that that can be performed by our veterinary service program veterinarians. All you have to do is register with it. So I'll have a link in the handout about how to register and what all you need for that. And then as well, there's the livestock extension unit. So that includes myself and my colleague Bastien. We both really enjoy livestock, and we're always here to chat. So reach out to us if you have questions or concerns regarding your animals. We like having open communication and providing resources for those around us. And yeah, I'll lead into some questions. So I'll check out the chat here. And doesn't look like there's any in the chat. So one that we got earlier that I kind of touched on was to do with if an animal is sick or dying, what do I do? And that leads into the veterinary services program. So contacting them, letting them know what's happening. If your animal is sick and you are unsure what to do, they can kind of give you some advice, let you know the best practices moving forward. They could even do a visit. Or you could, if your animal does happen to die, contact them. They can discuss whether a necropsy is needed or reasonable, or if it might just be that bird's end of life. I mean, birds do age, unfortunately. I mean, it's part of owning livestock. But if your animal goes to the veterinarian and they do a necropsy, they can take it to the landfill for you afterwards, or you can take it yourself to the landfill. So here's a question. Is it common to let hens out to wander the backyard? So it's not recommended. So you're going to want to have a run, and I do believe there is limits within the city of Whitehorse. If you're outside of that, it's more up to you, but if you're in the city of Whitehorse, your animals need to be confined. To let your chickens run around in the backyard, it puts them at risk for different types of predators. So there's aerial predators, or there's common things like foxes. Foxes really love chickens, unfortunately. And definitely with avian influenza and fall migration, spring migration this year, it's not recommended just because it's a good way for them to interact with one another, be touching each other's feed, waterers. So it's not really recommended to do. So yeah. How long do chickens usually live? Great question. A few years. Personally, I've never really owned any for more than 5 years, but that's older laying hens. But definitely looking into the breeds and different lifespans is a good option. But as they age, their egg production gets lower. So when you start seeing a drop in their egg production, a lot of people retire their birds. So it's kind of hard to gauge. Any other fun questions? We'll have to come in at a time. How to avoid entry impacted or sour crop. I'll actually add that one into the handout versus regarding it here, because I do believe that there is quite a bit of information that would go into that answer. But I will add it to my list here, and I'll get back to you on that. Does the litter only need to be in the coop itself or in some or all of the run? Part of my run is on rocks rather than grass. You're gonna want litter in your coop, definitely, but you don't necessarily need it in the run, so they're able to scratch on the rocks and everything like that. It shouldn't impact their health unless they're spending, like, if they're locked out of the coop essentially. So personal preference on whether you want litter outside, but it's not really needed. Pecking, how to mitigate. So pecking, unfortunately, does happen. You can mitigate it by ensuring that there's a healthy balance between types of birds. So for example, if you have 6 birds and 5 of them are all one particular breed and they're a gray color, for example, and then you get another breed and it's one singular one and say it's a brown bird, they're going to pick on the brown bird because it looks different. But if you had an even mixture of the two, they're not going to notice it as much. So that's one good way of mitigating. Another is if a bird has an injury, they'll tend to peck at it. So if they see the red mark or the skin mark of them, they'll peck at that. So taking that bird away until it heals and the feathers grow back is a great option for mitigating. Providing enrichments. So like I mentioned with some of the vegetables, putting that in so that they have something to keep them occupied with. And then deep diving into really, did it come out of nowhere? Is it because I changed my feed? That's kind of one of their ways that they communicate with us. Something's wrong is when they start kind of picking at one another. But it is normal to have happened, but to have it happen in excess is unnormal. Any other questions? So you have lots. Feel free to email me as well. So I'll see if I can pop us onto my other screen wherever my mouse went. So there's the agriculture-livestock at yukon.ca email, and both Bastien and I have access to that, and we can both kind of answer questions as they come in, whether you have lots or a little, and we can help you out with that. Do I have a list of local poultry producers? I actually do not, unfortunately. I wish I did. Um, I would just recommend like reaching out to some of your friends and seeing about if they're raising chicks, if they have retired laying hens and different areas like that. I think that there's a Yukon poultry Facebook group. I think Taryn was mentioning that to me earlier today. So you can reach out on there and pick their brains a little bit about what they like here in the Yukon, what animals work well, strategies and resources. But yeah.